There we go. So just to acknowledge, we spent 3 weeks, I think, talking about taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and in many ways they were a discussion of what would motivate someone to decide to practice as a Buddhist. And in many points of way, Buddhism is not an exclusive religion. If you wanted to, go to church or attend synagogue or something else as a Buddhist, yeah, so yeah, sure. But you've come to a conclusion that in the from the Buddhist point of view, that the pathway to liberation from suffering lies in following the example of the Buddha. Whatever else you do, that's fine, right? You could also be a member of the Lions Club or coach your local, ringette team. You can do lots of things in society. It's not exclusively you have to only do this, but we're saying, oh, we're following the example of the Buddha. We're making use of the teachings that have been handed down. That's the Dharma. And we're relying on our community to both reflect back to us where we've grown and where we could grow further, where our transformational edge is, right? So that's the Sangha. And I know that Robert last week, and I really, again, thank you, Robert, for leading the Community Refuge, shared with you a set of teachings that I think of as the 4 thoughts. I think you actually had 5, the thoughts that turn your mind towards practicing the Dharma. And, it's sort of like, you can take for granted that, you'll live for a long, long time. It seems like one day happens, and then the next day happens, and then the next day happens. And then suddenly something punctures the illusion of an endless string of days in front of you, or me, and points out that everything comes to an end sooner or later. So-called impermanence. Everything changes. And so that could be the death of a loved one, or the receiving of a diagnosis, or just you wake up and, you were really enjoying the, beautiful weather of choose a season like spring. And then all of a sudden it's forest fire season. Spring is gone and now there's smoke in the air. And you go, oh, things don't stay the same. And that each of those thoughts that turn your mind are like, they puncture the illusion that you could just rest in sort of a comfortable, numb, I don't have to do anything, and inspire you to exert yourself to practice. Because to be quite honest, Buddhist practice requires effort. It's not a go to church, and this is not a critique of other spiritualities, but we don't believe, at least the way I was taught, that you go to church, you say the proper words, and you're fixed for the week or forever, right? It's a very ongoing, interactive, full engagement spiritual path. And knowing that led me to choose this topic. I was in a discussion this past week with Margaret's and my son, and this came up, and I was like, oh, that would be a good thing to talk about. So it's a bit technical, and I'm not going to be super technical about it, but you can find a lot about this online and doing research. And it's sort of a discussion of how your mind works. And maybe more to the point, it's a discussion of how what closes the prison doors of samsara, what keeps you trapped in suffering, and what would open them up. So just as a very, very fast review, and as I really intend this to be very fast and place this in context, right? There are 3 broad streams of Buddhist teaching, what we've been calling the foundation path, which is developing personal freedom, which is where these teachings come from. And then there's the greater path, which has to do with the openness of reality and the importance of compassion. And then there's the immediate path, which is like liberation on the spot. So we're in the foundation path, and we're really looking at, why am I stuck? What is it with my ego? The four truths that the Buddha taught, suffering is inevitable. Life is a struggle. The cause of this, there's a cause to the struggle, which is our holding on to our sense of self-importance, right? And then there's a way to, you could free yourself from that. That's the third. There's a possibility of freedom. So struggle, cause, freedom, and then the way to get free, the Eightfold Path. But how come I'm stuck? What causes this stuckness? And so there are many, many teachings in something called the Abhidharma, which is, you might translate as a psychology of Buddhism, of the Buddhist understanding of how the mind and consciousness works. And I'd like to spend some time in the next while exploring that. And I thought I would start with this. So here's the simplest version. Deep down, each of us believes me is real. I'm just going to repeat that. Deep down, each of us, you and I, we all believe me is real. It's so taken for granted that to question it, might cause somebody to call the police and do a mental health intervention. It's just universal. It's the universal, from the Buddhist point of view, the universal mistake in perception. We take the experience of being aware or having consciousness, and we turn it into me. So deep down, each of us believe that me is real. We take the experience of just regular awareness, just baseline, ordinary awareness, and we think that proves me. For example, I'm here looking at a computer screen. Well, there must be a me because there's me in the screen, right? And we do that over and over and over. And we've done it for so long that it becomes our shared mistaken belief about reality. And so my suggestion when you were meditating of noticing how thoughts pop up seemingly out of nowhere. I mean, maybe you remembered something that you want to do later in the day. You're just trying to sit and be with your breath. It's not a complicated exercise. And all of a sudden, you're lost in thoughts about this errand or task you have to do later. Or you're remembering a fight or maybe a happy scene from earlier in your life. Or, it was just a 5-minute sit, but you feel like you're going to die if you don't move. All kinds of physical perceptions and sensations and memories and thoughts and hopes and dreams, they bubble up seemingly out of nowhere. And they're sort of your deep consciousness calling out, look at me. That's you. Look at me. Me is still here. Don't pay attention to that breath, right? That's taking your focus away from me. And if the sad memory didn't do it, then maybe the volume gets turned up and the memory feels even sadder. And if that doesn't work, maybe it's a happy memory or a worry or a plan. But something will bubble up continuously trying to grab your attention, right, to prove me. That is the basic first essential mistaken perception that Buddhism tries to engage. Now, you can do all kinds of logical analyses of how that me is not so real, and maybe we'll do some of that. What's interesting as a meditator, if you sit for any length of time, you realize that worry popped up and then flew away. And then maybe it came up again, but it's not exactly the same thing. It's like, there it is again, right? And then there it is again, like a little child tugging at you, wanting your attention, right? Or, that didn't work, something else calls out. There's a very famous text in that many of us have practiced this ceremony called a sadhana, the sadhana of the great symbol of awakening, the sadhana of Mahamudra. And the text says, good and bad, happy and sad, all thoughts, and you could all me's, vanish into emptiness like the imprint of a bird on the sky. The bird flies by, doesn't leave any tracks. The me comes up, yells me, and then goes away and doesn't leave any residue. And then me. Right? So just to stop for a second and think about, oh, I do actually believe and act as if me is real. And this practice is suggesting that me, it's the way you experience things. It's like the snack in the rope or the snake in the rope. It might be your experience. You might walk in and have this fundamental, like, right, like misapprehension of that thing on the ground as a snake. It is long and dark and skinny and, sort of curled, right? And then the lights get turned. Oh, it wasn't what I thought, right? So a lot of Buddhist practice is designed to get you to the, it's not what I thought. In Buddhist psychology, we are constantly, what is suggested, we are constantly making up our own realities. And so the examples we had, like, story about, story about somebody saying they wanted to go for a walk with you, or they would be happy to go for a walk with you. And then you jump to a conclusion of like, oh, they don't really want to, or, walking into a supermarket and seeing something happening and thinking the story about the young man and immediately having a story that you believe, and then coming outside and engaging the person and finding out, oh, it wasn't exactly what I thought. Or I'll just do another one. I love this one, hiring somebody to do some work, and they're actually doing work for you, but because they disappeared from your field of perception, they drove the truck to dump the garden waste at wherever they were taking it, you thought that they'd gone out for coffee. Right. When they come back, you sort of get, well, no, they were actually still on the job. They just were they have to take it somewhere. I don't want them to leave all that stuff here. Right. And so there's this interesting shift of perception of like, oh, I'm constantly making up this story. So here's some basic, Buddhist ideas about that. And these are called the 51, which is why we started with Paul Simon's song about 50 ways, 50 ways to leave. These are like the 51 ways to make up reality. And I'm not going to go through the list of 51 because that would take a long time. And there would be lots of examples and trying to figure it out. And by the way, the 51 is not exhaustive. There are probably 51 billion ways to make up reality. But there's a classic list of 51. And they divide into natural ways, like the things that everybody does, good ways, bad ways, neutral ways. And so 4 basic baskets of how we do this. So each of us, we sort of have a natural perception of you're there, I must be here. And that sort of reaction that we have that builds up like moment by moment. You open your eyes and immediately you're you again. Whoever you were when you were dreaming is let go of, and you're back as me. Right? That happens so fast. Those 5 are just the 5 normal ways. Right? Sometimes they're listed as form, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness. It just happens like that. Right? And then there are positive ways, like you might feel compassion towards someone or love. Margaret and I just had our son visiting, and it's like lots of family feeling and affection, and that's a positive way. We're making up reality. If some stranger had walked in, slept in the spare bedroom, and wanted to make coffee in the morning, I don't know that I'd have had the same story. So, you make up the story, the family story, right? And there's lots of ways we do that. And then there are ways we make up the negative story. Right? So somebody cuts you off in traffic, or you see some post on social media that really pushes your buttons, or you read the news, and immediately there's some kind of prompt, something happens that sparks this making up, this forming or gathering together of impressions and ideas and stories, and you make up a reality. And so earlier I was using as an example the 45th president, and I know he evokes very strong reactions. I did that somewhat calculatedly. If you had a strong reaction to his name, well, there you go. There's a negative reaction, right? I hope you don't carry that around. Please try your best to let it go. Think of something nice. Push it out with something better, right? And then there are neutral ways, you know. Things that don't leave much of a karmic effect. So, underneath of all of this, there is this idea that the way our mind works, and I'm trying to like take a very complex idea and bring it down into something very usable and direct, experiential, is we're constantly making up our world through our reactions. And we have a basic reaction. The most essential core reaction is that I'm real. So many times in Community Refuge, we've used the example of river and a rock, that the way things are is more like a flowing river, right? Going by moment by moment by moment and changing, but we freeze it and hold on to it as if it was a rock. And the basic rock that we hold on to is me. It even happens when you say, I want to get enlightened. Well, the biggest obstacle to enlightenment is the me that wants to get there. The fastest way to get there is to let go of me. But that's a hard sell because I want to get enlightened, right? And so we spend a lot of time with that. And so I invite you, when you do your meditation practice, there's two things, one meditation and one after you meditate. When you're meditating, just for the next week, just notice how much, like a thought just bubbles up out of nowhere. We could talk about the out of nowhere. Maybe we'll do that next week, right? Where it's coming from and why all that happens. But, just notice like, oh, there's my thought. I can remember sitting my first time I sat for a month in a month-long retreat, and I was having all these thoughts, and I looked around, I was like, no one else is having those thoughts. No, they're my memory, and they're my specific way of holding on to me. Everyone was holding on to their own individual me, right? And we had some collective me going on about whether we liked the food or how hot the room was or cold or comfortable, but individually we were all having these thoughts bubble up and holding on to them and letting go. And so you take a posture, an awake posture, you bring your attention to something like the breath, right? And that's just an anchor to hold yourself present and open. And then you're noticing the me comes up, and then you let it go. I'm using the word me instead of ego because sometimes when we say ego, people hear good versus bad or right versus wrong. And what I'm trying to suggest is everyone has this kind of me, this ego. And we're just noticing it and then letting it flow on down the stream. And then back to the breath, right? And you're open, you're conscious. Maybe for a brief moment, there isn't any me. You don't need a me to breathe, right? You're just there, right? And then the next thought, and you let that go, and then the next one. And so you're alternating moments of openness and moments of river and moments of rock. And you're trying to become more familiar with the flowing river and actually notice, oh, there's my rock. There's my me, right? So that's on the cushion, on the meditation cushion while you're practicing. Off the meditation cushion, you might, just for the week, play a game with yourself to see. I like thinking of this as a game. And here's the suggestion. Every time you have a reaction, whether it's a happy, strong reaction or a strong, angry, or negative reaction, every time you have a reaction, me is involved. And so notice how many times you get reactive. If you're like me, that earlier this morning I was doing the dishes. I was actually just doing the dishes, right? And then I had another chore to do. I was cleaning a filter for the hot tub, and there was very little me in doing the dishes. It's a chore I've done a gazillion times. Just the sensuality of the water and the soap and the dishes, and it's clean, it's not clean, it's just happening. Right? It's like the river. And then I pick up the filter and I haven't done that as much. And I have a lot of story about like it has to be done this way and this is the right way. And I'm going to do it this way and then turn it. And a lot more reactivity on a very normal activity. And so I invite you to, play a little game of tag with yourself and see how often you can catch me during the week. So with that, that's what I had to share for this week. We're firmly in the foundation teachings, which have a lot to do with liberation from me, getting set free from the prison of me. And it starts by noticing the prison bars, me. So with that, I'm going to pause the recording. Pause the recording.